So today we're going to be looking at another Wes Huff thing. This guy's making his rounds, which I am all for multiple reasons. One, he's a great apologist when it comes to textual criticism. He's fantastic at what he did with Billy Carson, his expertise. But it's, again, ironic that I knew somehow that he would be used to sort of attack the Catholic Church. And I don't know why I thought this, because there's so many apologists out there that just refrain from this. Like William Lane Craig has been on Matt Fradd's podcast, and like there's this interaction that some of these more theistic experts refrain from attacking certain portions of Christianity. Wes seems to be hopping headfirst into some of this. I have not watched this whole thing. I actually found a 5-minute version, and I thought, okay, I want more context because this doesn't really go into much. So we're going to engage and watch this and kind of flip around. I watched up to like 20 minutes, and I was like, okay, let's talk about this. Let's see what we can come up with and how we engage this. So I'm going to skip around a little bit. So bear with me.
Words,
the topic is the canon of Scripture.
Who chose, and this is the title of the thing we're doing here, and we can talk about kind of the wording here. Who chose the books of the Bible? And so I want you to kind of help us through this, okay? This is a study of the canon, right? The canon of Scripture. Can you give us kind of what is the canon? What is this thing? Apocryphal books? Like, what does this mean? Apocrypha? Can you just help us to define some of these terms as we get going here?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions.
If you guys want to know the definitions of these various words, Google or go watch the first portion of this video.
The canon of the Scripture, at least in the Protestant canon, is the 66 books of the Bible. And apocryphal is anything outside of that. So that encompasses a whole range of stuff. Sometimes you mentioned, Tim, the Apocrypha. So there's this group of literature that sometimes refer to the Apocrypha. In Catholic Bibles, you'll see it's called a Deuterocanonical books. And that means, if you think about Deuteronomy, right, second law, Deutero and Nomos, Deuterocanonical means second canon, literally a second canon. In fact, I have an NRSV on my shelf here, and it says that HarperCollins Study Bible, including apocryphal Deuterocanonical books. So it has both the term.
It's because it's from HarperCollins. This is like becoming a thing with Wes, where he turns around and grabs a book. Let me go grab mine. Okay, I actually have here from Catholic Bible Press, NRSV. It was actually my first Bible that I got. It says New Revised Standard Version, Catholic Edition, Anglicized text from HarperCollins. Old Testament. It's weird. I'm not getting anything Apocrypha or anything like that in here. That's because, and I worked for a publisher before, so I know this, depending on who is writing the commentary and actually doing if it's a translation or a study or anything like that, if they're Protestant, it's going to say that. If it's Catholic imprinted, it's not going to say that. It's just, again, the biases. So just because your version of that, Wes, says that, doesn't mean that they all say that. It's entirely irrelevant.
Apocryphal and Deuterocanonical books.
Okay.
And so usually when we use the term Apocrypha, we're talking about those books that are Old Testament stuff that is in like a Catholic Bible or an Orthodox Bible, Greek, capital O Orthodox. But if we're talking about apocryphal literature, that encompasses everything, including the Gnostic Gospels, including some like stuff we call pseudepigraphal, which is other.
Makes a really good point here in clarifying these two things, because I don't think a lot of people realize, because when you hear Apocrypha, you're like, how many books is that? What books are those? That differential of the term is actually an interesting little historical perspective that you can go down that ties pretty directly to the Reformation.
Old Testament stuff. But just to define our terms, canon means the books of the Bible, when I'm going to use that term.
Yeah.
And
my ESV Bible not have those books in there. It has 39 books. I know the you correct me if I'm wrong, the Jewish scriptures, it was actually 24 books. And those it's the same books that we have in ours, but they put, First and Second Kings together, and they put First and Second Chronicles together. And so the Tanakh, it's the same as what we use. And so why is it that there's this apocrypha, and why is it included in the Catholic Bible but not in ours?
Yeah, so there's a few things to address there. Specifically, what these books are is you have a period between what we call our Old and New Testament, and that's a period of about 400 years. So if you think of the gutter between Malachi and Matthew is about 400 years. And so in between that, you have the Jews, the nation of Israel, writing histories and other books. They're chronicling things. They're writing philosophical texts and that kind of stuff. And so you're exactly right. The Jewish canon, what's referred to as the Tanakh, the Torah, the Law, the Nevi'im, which is the prophetic writings, and the Ketuvim, which are like Psalms and Proverbs, the poetic sort of writings. We have the exact same number. So you'll see this number thrown around in like ancient writings like Philo or Josephus, some of those early Jews who may or may not recognize their names, and they throw either the number 22 or 23 out. Now, that's not a different number than we have in our Old Testaments, like you said, Tim. Exact same books, different order. They order the prophets in different ways, and they order, like you said, Chronicles and Kings. We have First and Second Chronicles.
I want to address the 400 years of silence, because the idea of this, if you've ever studied Second Temple Judaism, in college or otherwise, you'll come across this 400-year period. But this concept is sharpened through Protestant theology, because in the Catholic understanding of salvation history, during this period, God continued to work among his people. Like, he didn't just stop working through people for 400 years for no reason. And this is evidenced in the canon that we have. For example, in Second Maccabees, it discusses the intercession of heaven on earth, and showing active faith and people interacting with the means of the Lord still. So it's not like he's not wrong that that's this period, this little gutter, as he called it, exists. But it's not as wide of a gutter when you take the historical canon and recognized books. But
Chronicles, First and Second Kings, and that's what we have. They just have Chronicles or Kings. And in fact, any Hebrew publication is translated by the same document that any Christian publication is. It's called the Hebraica Biblia Stratagensia. And so we're dealing with the same texts. But it's a key thing to understand that the Jews throughout history never thought that those other documents were scripture unanimously. What starts to happen, where the whole story starts to get rolling, is about 200 years before Jesus. You have the language of the ancient world being Greek. And so what happens is the Old Testament, what we know as the Old Testament, is translated into Greek in what's known as the Septuagint. And the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. But they also, along with that, translated some of these other books. And so you get collections of these Jewish writings, and they include the Old Testament. But you get to the Christians, the further you move Christianity away from a Jewish movement and into a Gentile movement, then you have early Christians reading the Old Testament in Greek, the Septuagint, and the New Testament in Greek, because that's what it was written in. And then there are these other books floating around. And the real questions start to happen, I think, when you see the Jewishness of Christianity move into a Gentileness, and they start to question some of those things. Now, we'll talk about sort of the dust settling on the canon in general. But I think unanimously what we can say is that by the time of Jesus, they knew what the books of Scripture were. So Josephus has this line, the books that were laid up in the temple. And I think we can prove pretty concisely that those were that 22 or 23 number. What we have in our...
I think I missed something.
You see the Jewishness of Christianity move and these other writings. Now, an interesting thing with some of these other writings, in fact, I think it's all of the other writings, is that they only exist in Greek. There are no Hebrew copies of, say, Maccabees or Tobit or... Actually,
ironically, pretty sure Tobit and Sirach are both found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew. You can fact check me on that, as I'm fact checking him. Community notes. Pretty sure Tobit and Sirach both existed. And again, just because we don't have them existing in Hebrew, the rest of them doesn't mean that it at one time don't exist in Hebrew. So not a great argument there, especially since we potentially have two found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew. So them being Greek only is a poor argument on the face of it. Sorry, I skipped around a little bit there, kind of getting back to where he was at. He mentions Josephus, and I think this is a slight misinterpretation of it, but claiming the Jewish canon at the time of Jesus excluded the Deuterocanonical books, based on Josephus' writings, you're talking about a sectarian view. So you're talking about the Pharisaical Judaism at this time. So it's not a consensus amongst Jewish groups. The Essenes, they directly revere text in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or why we have them. And moreover, Josephus, why is it so hard to say that guy's name? His assertion cannot supersede the church's discernment on this. Like, we're talking about looking backwards, right? As Christ entrusts his authority to the church, we understand that these nuances fold out over time, just like the Trinitarian doctrine did. But no, there was no consensus between the Judaism at the time. So that's just an oversimplification of a claim. Oops.
Yeah. Books of Scripture as well. So I think we can say definitively that the Jews in Jesus' day had the same canon of Scripture that we have as our Old Testament. Okay. But Christians later on start to question, okay, what do we do with these other books?
Oh, by the way, as Christians, as he says, we already listened to this part where the Christians are trying to decide what do we do with these other books. Very early councils who were trying to discern Scripture, like Rome, Hippo, Carthage, all affirmed the Catholic books that we have today.
And that's when the conversations start to happen.
And I think they quote, "A worker deserves his wages." You have and he says those are Scripture. He calls them, is the term.
And that's where things really start to get like the early church period. So it can really mean a few hundred years in that sense. And when we're talking about this early church period, the dust settles and you really start to get no debate about those 66 books that we establish as our Bible. Okay. But there's always debate about these other books. And if you push that even further into history, I mean, when the official Roman Catholic Church starts, big R, big C, they even are debating that. And you can name
this, and this goes to the view of Scripture, because since the Reformation, we have overemphasized canon, and not unironically, the church dogmatizes things in response to schism and heresy. So when Luther said, "This is my Bible," the church responds with, "This is the canon." They define it. De fide. They define it. And in doing that, they're responding to a schismatic. They're responding to a heretic. And I'm not saying all of Luther is wrong. Just don't overarch what I'm saying. But So their canon is in response to that, just like the Trinitarian dogma that happened early on in Christianity was in response to a heresy of Arian. So it's like you have to look at this as a whole, of what the church is doing throughout history. You can't just parse it how you want to, and Hebrews 11 and references Second Maccabees. Wisdom 2 is mentioned in the prefig of Christ. These things are, and themes in Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, all this stuff is intertwined into these books, the books of wisdom. It's incredible to read. And again, the oversimplification and over nuanced view of the Reformation on God-inspired scripture needs to be articulated in the whole of history, because again, we survived centuries without a canon. So let's not overemphasize things. Like, let's overemphasize the church rather than the arguments of canon. Though I do think it's important. Obviously, I'm responding to it. So I think I want to skip ahead to I have a couple of more sections I want to talk about.
Jerome is the opposite. Jerome really knows his stuff. And so in 312, around then, what's referred to as the Edict of Milan, Christianity is decriminalized. And so all of the Christians start to come out of the woodwork, and Constantine commissions Bibles to be made. And he commissions Jerome to translate all of the Greek Bible, the Old and New Testaments, into Latin, because people aren't speaking Greek nearly to the degree that they were before. They're speaking Latin. And so that's what eventually becomes, if you've heard the word Vulgate, the Latin Vulgate. Jerome does that initial translation. And he's trying to figure out whether he should include the Apocryphal books, and he doesn't think he should.
I don't know that you can say he doesn't think he should, because he ends up affirming them, and his contemporary Augustine defends the canonicity that he puts out. So again, an oversimplification of the topic.
And one of the main reasons is he goes and he interviews Jewish scholars, and they say these aren't scripture. And so he goes back and...
Correct. The people who killed Jesus and changed part of their writings, which we can look at in the rabbinic writings. Wish I had a shelf to pull this off of, like Wes does. It'd be cooler. To assert, they added things in to criminalize Christ. Why would we go to them for an authority? Because what Wes is actually doing here, he's trying to make the argument that Jerome, and Protestants do this later, so we'll get to that in a second. He's trying to make the argument that Jerome interviewed these Jewish scholars, and in doing so, found the authority in Judaism, saying, okay, this is the concrete historical view of the Jews. This is what we need to do and adapt. These aren't the scriptures to them, blah, blah, blah. So either way you look at it, you're making someone the rule of authority in the canon. Either you are playing off the historical Jews who want to denounce Christ, or you're getting your canon from the church that Christ instituted. And it is actually, I'm not oversimplifying that. That is actually your two options when you look at the canon, which, again, should be obvious.
He goes back, actually, Augustine debates him on this a little bit and thinks that a lot of these books should be considered scripture, but Jerome doesn't. So the reformers are reading this kind of stuff.
I don't know that I don't know that you should be saying he shouldn't, or that Jerome said they shouldn't be.
And so they say, no, it's not scriptures. The 66 books are scripture. When we say sola fide, that's what we're talking about, scripture alone. And in reaction to that, the Roman Catholic Church, in what's called the Council of Trent, which is like
it's previously talked about, the church does things like this in response to schismatics and heresies. It's not new. It's not novel. It's happened for thousands of years. We can point to it throughout all the councils. Almost any time something is dogmatized, it is in response to heresy or a schismatic. And that's important. That's a very important clarification to make. And I think it goes under the radar a lot. So I'm not going to go through this whole hour just yet. I wanted to stop here because I feel like if I make another 2-hour long video on this, drive everybody nuts. But, I would articulate swiftly that, or reiterate swiftly, that at some point, one way or another, you are relying on a authority to define your canon, whether you're Protestant or you're Catholic or Orthodox. Throw those guys in there too. You're either relying on the textual critique and analysis that's heavily weighted and reliant upon the Jews who deny Jesus, or the canon that was used and recognized throughout the church history and it was solidified in response to that by the church that Christ instituted. It's like, pick your, there is a poison in that one. Like, I don't know. I would love a counterpoint to this. So if you're Protestant and you have a counterpoint to that, let me know what that would be, because I'm sort of articulating this on the spot as I'm thinking through it. Let me know what that would be. I would love to hear a critique of that before we continue on. I'm going to finish watching this video, and if there's anything that pops up that I think would be interesting to dialogue, we'll do it. Until then, see you next time.